Jack Thompson stood at the head of the mahogany conference table in his penthouse office, surrounded by the city's elite business leaders. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him showcased the sprawling metropolis he helped shape through his real estate empire. His custom-made Italian suit and gold watch weren't just accessories, they were statements of power. "Success isn't given, it's taken," Jack declared to his attentive audience, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never faced real adversity. The room hung on his every word as he detailed his latest development project, a luxury high-rise that would replace an aging apartment complex. When someone raised concerns about displaced residents, Jack dismissed them with a practiced wave of his hand. "Progress requires sacrifice," he said, drawing knowing nods from his colleagues. "We're not running a charity, we're running a business." The comment earned appreciative chuckles from around the table. Jack's disdain for social issues wasn't just apparent, it was part of his brand. He prided himself on being practical and realistic, terms he used to justify his cutthroat approach to business. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment across town, Aaliyah sat on her worn couch, staring at the positive pregnancy test in her trembling hands. The small living room, neat but showing signs of wear, felt suddenly smaller. The evening light filtering through thin curtains cast long shadows across the floor, matching her growing anxiety. "What am I going to do, Mama?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother, Sarah, sat beside her, weathered hands clasping her daughter's. Unlike the cold luxury of Jack's world, their home was warm with the smell of cooking and the weight of generations of struggle and perseverance. "You're stronger than you know, baby," Sarah assured her, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had faced similar challenges. "We come from women who never gave up, no matter what life threw at them." She shared stories of Aaliyah's grandmother, who raised 5 children alone while working 2 jobs, and her great-grandmother, who fought for workers' rights in the 1960s. The conversation with her mother filled Aaliyah with a determined resolve. She would face this challenge head-on, just as the women before her had done. She began making plans, calculating expenses, and thinking about how to tell her employer. The moment of truth came sooner than expected. Jack's reaction to the news of Aaliyah's pregnancy was swift and cold. In his home office, surrounded by awards and photographs of himself with celebrities and politicians, he didn't even look up from his computer screen as he delivered the news of her termination. "Your services will no longer be required," he stated flatly, as if discussing the weather. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay." When Aaliyah tried to explain her situation, Jack cut her off with a raised hand. "This is a business decision, nothing personal. I'm sure you understand." The contrast between them couldn't have been starker, Jack in his tailored suit, protected by wealth and privilege, and Aaliyah in her simple uniform, her hand unconsciously moving to protect her unborn child. For Jack, this was just another day, another decision to maintain his carefully controlled world. He didn't see the tremor in Aaliyah's hands or the tears she fought to hold back. As Aaliyah left the mansion for the last time, Jack had already moved on to his next meeting, the incident already forgotten in his mind. He failed to notice the quiet dignity with which she carried herself or the strength beginning to build in her eyes. In his world of power moves and profit margins, there was no room for understanding the impact of his actions on others' lives. In a gleaming skyscraper's executive floor, Jack Thompson commanded attention during his quarterly business meeting. His steel gray suit cost more than what most people earned in a month, and he knew it. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as he presented his latest real estate acquisition plans. "Gentlemen, success isn't about being liked, it's about being feared and respected," Jack declared, clicking through slides showing property valuations. His audience, composed of board members and investors, nodded in agreement. They all knew Jack's reputation for aggressive business tactics and unprecedented returns. "Our Q3 profits have exceeded projections by 47%, he continued, deliberately pausing for effect. "And Q4 looks even better." The room erupted in approving murmurs. Jack savored these moments, where his power was undisputed and his word was law. When a junior board member raised concerns about displaced families from their latest development project, Jack's response was swift and cutting. "We're not running a charity here. The market doesn't care about feelings." The questioner shrank back, effectively silenced. Meanwhile, in a small apartment across town, Aaliyah sat on her bathroom floor, staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone to call her mother. The contrast between her world and Jack's couldn't have been starker. "Mama, I need you," she whispered into the phone. Within an hour, her mother arrived, bringing warmth and strength to the small space. They sat at Aaliyah's kitchen table, where the overhead light flickered occasionally, another repair she couldn't yet afford. "I'm scared, Mama," Aaliyah admitted, her voice steady despite her fear. "But I want this baby." Her mother reached across the table, gripping her daughter's hand firmly. "Your grandmother raised 5 children by herself, working 2 jobs," her mother reminded her. "She didn't have much, but she had determination. That's in your blood too." The words weren't meant as poetry, they were a statement of fact, a reminder of their family's resilience. Aaliyah spent that night planning. She calculated her savings, researched pregnancy resources, and made lists of necessary preparations. Her practical approach to the situation reflected her character, methodical, responsible, and determined. The next morning, Aaliyah arrived at Jack's mansion early, as she had every day for the past 3 years. She cleaned methodically while gathering her courage to share the news. When Jack finally emerged from his home office around noon, she seized her opportunity. "Mr. Thompson, I need to discuss something important with you," she began, standing straight despite her nervousness. Jack barely looked up from his phone. "Make it quick." "I have a meeting in 20 minutes, he replied, his attention divided. "I'm pregnant, sir," Aaliyah stated directly. "I wanted to discuss my maternity leave options." Jack's reaction was immediate. His face hardened, and he finally looked directly at her. "That won't be necessary," he said coldly. "Consider this your 2 weeks' notice. HR will process your final payment." The dismissal was swift and brutal. Jack didn't raise his voice or show anger, he didn't need to. His power lay in his ability to destroy someone's livelihood with the same emotion he'd show while ordering coffee. "But sir, I've worked here for 3 years, Aaliyah protested, maintaining her composure. "I'm a good employee." "We're a good employee," Jack corrected, already turning away. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance. That's more than generous. We're done here." He walked away, leaving Aaliyah standing in his spotless kitchen, a kitchen she had maintained meticulously for years. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack returned to his office, already focused on his next meeting, while Aaliyah gathered her few personal belongings. As she left the mansion for the last time, Jack was already dictating emails about property acquisitions, her dismissal nothing more than a minor administrative task completed. He didn't see her straighten her shoulders as she walked out, didn't notice the determination replacing the shock in her eyes. The day ended with 2 contrasting scenes: Jack at his penthouse bar, celebrating another successful business deal with expensive scotch, and Aaliyah at her kitchen table, methodically planning her next steps with a cup of tea growing cold beside her. Neither knew that this day would set in motion events that would eventually force them to confront their shared humanity. After her dismissal, Aaliyah's life transformed rapidly. Her small apartment, once a source of pride, became an impossible expense. Each bill arrival brought fresh anxiety. She sat at her kitchen table, calculator in hand, running numbers that refused to add up favorably. The pregnancy complications started subtly, first with severe morning sickness that left her unable to work full days at temporary jobs, then with concerning blood pressure readings that required frequent medical visits. Each doctor's appointment depleted her dwindling savings, the numbers in her bank account dropping as steadily as her anxiety rose. "I can give you until the end of the month," her landlord said, showing unexpected patience but unable to extend further flexibility. Aaliyah nodded, knowing she had already stretched his goodwill thin. The walls of her apartment seemed to close in as she packed her belongings into cardboard boxes borrowed from local stores. The women's shelter wasn't what she expected. Clean but sparse, it housed other women in similar situations, some escaping abuse, others, like her, simply caught in life's cruel timing. Her room, shared with another expectant mother, offered basic necessities: a bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking a concrete courtyard. "You're lucky to get in here," the intake worker told her. "We usually have a waiting list." Aaliyah understood the truth behind those words. She was both fortunate and unfortunate to need this place. Meanwhile, Jack Thompson's life continued its upward trajectory. He hosted lavish parties in his penthouse, each more extravagant than the last. The dismissal of a pregnant housekeeper never crossed his mind, it was merely one of countless decisions he made daily. "You've outdone yourself, Jack," a business associate commented at his latest soiree, gesturing at the ice sculpture centerpiece and the uniformed wait staff circulating with champagne. Jack smiled, accepting the compliment as his due. Yet something felt hollow about these celebrations. Late at night, when the parties ended and the guests departed, Jack sometimes stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city he was helping to reshape. Occasional moments of unease crept in, fleeting thoughts about the human cost of his success that he quickly drowned in aged scotch. Aaliyah's days took on a new rhythm at the shelter. She woke early, joining the line for the communal bathroom, then headed out to search for work. The pregnancy made finding employment challenging. Few wanted to hire someone who would need maternity leave in a few months. She found sporadic work cleaning houses, though the irony wasn't lost on her. Some employers would visibly hesitate upon seeing her pregnancy, their eyes moving from her growing belly to their expensive possessions. Others would hire her but watch her constantly, as if pregnancy might be contagious. Just temporary, she reminded herself during particularly difficult days. This is just temporary. The mantra became her touchstone, something to hold on to when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. The contrast between their lives couldn't have been starker. While Jack flew to exotic locations for weekend getaways, Aaliyah counted bus tokens, calculating if she could afford the trip to her next doctor's appointment. While he dined at exclusive restaurants, she learned to make her shelter meals stretch, sharing with other residents who had even less. Yet something was shifting. Jack's parties grew more frequent but less satisfying. He found himself avoiding quiet moments, filling them with noise and activity. The ghost of an uncomfortable feeling, not quite guilt, but something adjacent to it, began to haunt his quieter moments. At one particularly lavish event, a drunk guest mentioned a news story about homeless pregnant women. Can you imagine, the guest slurred, waving his champagne glass. In our city. Jack felt an unexpected twist in his stomach, quickly dismissed as indigestion from the canapes. Aaliyah, meanwhile, discovered unexpected strength in her circumstances. She began attending the shelter's free counseling sessions, where she met other women who had rebuilt their lives from similar situations. Their stories became her blueprint, their successes her possibility. She started documenting her experiences in a notebook borrowed from the shelter's donation box. What began as a way to process her emotions evolved into something more, a record of systemic inequality and resilience. The words flowed easily, capturing both the practical challenges and the emotional toll of her situation. The shelter's social worker noticed her writing. Your story could help others, she suggested, pointing out local advocacy groups that might be interested. Aaliyah tucked this information away, a seed planted for future growth. The days stretched into weeks, and weeks into months. While Jack's empire continued to expand, built on decisions that prioritized profit over people, Aaliyah's world contracted to essential concerns: health, shelter, and preparation for her child's arrival. Yet in this contraction, she found an expanding sense of purpose. 7 years passed, reshaping both lives in unexpected ways. Jack Thompson's empire grew exponentially. His company now occupied 3 floors of a downtown skyscraper, his name emblazoned across the building's facade in illuminated letters. Yet despite his mounting success, something had changed in him. During a board meeting, Jack found himself distracted by the view from his corner office. Below, construction crews worked on his latest development project, another luxury apartment complex. Mr. Thompson. His assistant's voice pulled him back. They're waiting for your decision on the displacement compensation package. He nodded automatically, approving the minimum required by law. But for the first time, he noticed the slight frown on his assistant's face before she turned away. These moments of disconnection had become more frequent. His mansion, filled with expensive art and designer furniture, felt increasingly empty despite its opulence. His family life reflected this hollowness. Breakfast with his wife and children had become a silent affair, everyone absorbed in their phones or tablets. His teenage daughter barely acknowledged him, and his son seemed to exist primarily through credit card statements from exclusive private schools. "Daddy, why don't you ever come to my recitals anymore?" his daughter had asked recently. Jack couldn't remember when he'd stopped attending. The calendar on his phone was packed with business meetings, but personal events had somehow slipped away. Meanwhile, Aaliyah had transformed her struggle into purpose. The small community center where she organized meetings buzzed with energy as domestic workers gathered to share experiences and plan actions. Her son, now 6 years old, played quietly in the corner, surrounded by books and toys donated by supporters. We need to make them see us as human beings, Aaliyah addressed the group, her voice carrying the weight of experience. The room was filled with women who shared similar stories of arbitrary dismissals, unpaid overtime, and workplace discrimination. What had started as informal support meetings had evolved into a movement. Local media had begun to take notice. A reporter from the city newspaper sat in the back of the room, taking notes as Aaliyah outlined their demands for better working conditions and legal protections. Her articulate presentation of their cause made compelling headlines. "Domestic Workers Fight for Rights," read the morning paper's headline. Jack's eyes caught the article during his morning routine, something in the photograph accompanying it tugging at his memory. He quickly turned the page, but the image lingered, a woman speaking passionately to a crowd, her face somehow familiar. The movement gained momentum. Aaliyah found herself speaking at community events, then at city council meetings. Her personal story became a rallying point, but she was careful to emphasize that it wasn't just about her. "This is about dignity," she would say. "About recognizing the humanity in all work." Her son grew up in this atmosphere of activism and community. He inherited his mother's quiet strength and determination, excelling in school despite their modest circumstances. The community they'd built supported them, creating a network of care and mutual aid that money couldn't buy. Jack's world, in contrast, grew more isolated. His success brought increased security measures, more layers between him and the outside world. During one particularly sleepless night, he wandered through his empty house, past rooms filled with unused furniture and unopened art pieces. In his home office, he found himself looking at old photographs. His company's early days, when he still knew every employee's name. When had that changed? When had people become numbers on spreadsheets rather than faces he recognized? The moment of reflection was interrupted by a late-night email about another acquisition opportunity. Jack turned to his computer, pushing away the uncomfortable thoughts. But they returned in quiet moments, like unwanted guests that couldn't be permanently evicted. Aaliyah's organization planned their largest demonstration yet, a march for domestic workers' rights that would pass directly in front of major corporate headquarters, including Jack's building. The irony wasn't lost on her, but personal vindication had long since ceased to be her primary motivation. The media